Hey, it's the Russian nightmare, Nikita Koloff, and you are watching the Tournament Podcast, or you are listening to the Tournament Podcast. Either way, you better stay tuned to Tom and Mike and the Marty Party, or I come after you, Shatoeta.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you again for tuning into the Tournament Podcast. We have a special guest with us today, one of the absolute great wrestlers of the 1980s and 90s, certainly one of our favorites. I had to take some notes here with all of the accomplishments of this gentleman. He's a multiple-time author, multiple-time champion in wrestling, six-man tag team singles titles. Of course, runs the Koloff Ministry. He's appeared in video games. He's in the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame, not once, but twice. And I've made an executive decision. I have not announced this to my brothers, but as we're starting here, we're going to create a Tournament Podcast Hall of Fame. And Mr. Nikita Koloff, you are the first inductee, so you are a three-time Hall of Famer.
Yes.
Hey, I am honored. I am honored. Thank you, gentlemen, for allowing me to come on and be with you. And great introduction. Thank you. Hopefully I can live up to some of that reputation.
Oh, you absolutely will. Now, we're going to try to stay as chronological as we can. It's going to be hard with three of us. We'll go with Marty first, then Mike, then I'll ask the third question, and we'll rotate. As I mentioned, I am the oldest of the three, but I have to admit Marty and Mike are more of the wrestling gurus. They're like machines when it comes to wrestling knowledge. But with Marty being the oldest of the two of them, I'm going to hand it off to Marty for the first question.
All right.
Come on, Marty.
Hello. First off, what an honor to have you on here. Just amazing. So excited, and we thank you for your time. I was hoping that we could ask you some questions that aren't generally asked of you. So I did want to start with your beginnings. I think most fans know, you're from Minnesota. You went to school with some of the all-time greats, Road Warriors, Rick Rude, Kurt Hennig. I wanted to kind of jump in right at the start when you met Jim Crockett. I know at that time that you were 285 pounds, 8% body fat, 34-inch waist. Very impressive. My first question is, what type of workout routine did you have, especially when you started in the business with that schedule and sleeping and eating?
Yeah, it's a great question. Hey, I wish somebody would have told me I was from Minnesota. All these years, I thought I was from Moscow. I mean,
That's what we thought too for the longest time.
As they say in wrestling, somebody should have smartened me up, But anyway, a little fun there, right? I worked out this morning, right? And so I am now consistently 50 years into training, 50, half a century into consistently. Now my workouts have changed from now to prior to back in those days, but to specifically address your question, I mean, I starting, falling in love with weightlifting at the age of 12 and really infatuated by bodybuilding and just taking care of my physique. And then a man by the name of Jerry McFarland in ninth grade, who was a health teacher, but he was also a professional bodybuilder, came into my life. He became one of my first male mentors and taught me a lot about what I still implement into my life today. All that said, back in those days, it was kind of a familiar term, a grind. I mean, it could be pretty grueling. We would wrestle, almost every single night. In fact, put it in perspective, in 1986, I had 454 matches that one year, just in that one year. But yet I would still make it a priority to get into the gym, probably a minimum of 2 hours a day. Probably work each body part approximately for about an hour. And to maintain that physique, I ate, on average, somewhere in the ballpark of 10,000 calories a day.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was a lot, but it was a mindset, right? I mean, it was just a process. It was a grind.
All right. And then Mike, if you want to go next, and then I'll jump in third.
Yeah. Kind of sticking with your beginnings there. When you first got into the business, considering how big you were, was there anybody, especially like in your rookie year, that I guess they tried to take liberties with you, or kind of tried to break you in being a rookie?
No, I mean, in fact, it was an interesting story. One of the let's see, I think they got a fancy name for it now. Let me think here. Hold on a second. Enhancement talent, I think is what it's the fancy name now. Back in those days, they were called jobbers, just for those who may not know that. But there was he actually became a good friend of mine, Gene Ligon. We actually went into business together and had some gyms together, but he was on the undercard. And one of my very first matches, first match against him, he later would tell me that Jim Crockett came to him and said, Nikita doesn't go off his feet. If he goes off his feet in your match, you're fired. And so Gene was all nervous about that. Of course, he didn't tell me that. And we're in the ring. We're actually in the Township Auditorium in Columbia, South Carolina. And I'm in the corner and I said, give me a Beal throw. And he's like, what? I go, the Beal throw. And so he does. And I take this, this bump and roll up to my feet. And he's freaking out. He's like, oh my gosh, I just lost my job. I just lost my job. Well, all that said, Crockett didn't fire him. But it was well known that in the early part of my career, especially that rookie year, that those were Crockett's orders, that they were going to build me into this, Russian monster, and that I didn't go off my feet, which I rarely did. Some would say I never did my entire career, but we know that's not true. Just walked the match. Anyway, and so that was Crockett's mentality and the persona that we were trying to build. And so fortunately, none of the other guys, at least that I'm aware of, tried to take any liberties.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and stay with the beginnings. And I've seen other interviews where you speak of Don Kernodle, Ivan Koloff, how much they meant to you, how much they helped you in those early years. But I've seen stuff online that it says you were trained by Eddie Sharkey. Is that accurate, or is that just internet?
Hey, everything's true if it's on the internet, right? No, and I don't know. I don't know who does that stuff, because I sure didn't. But to clear the air, probably for the 100th time, I guess I get lumped in with Eddie because he did train a lot of the Minnesota guys.
Yeah.
He trained me, or he actually said he did. I don't really know. But the reality is, the day I walked in Jim Crockett's office in June of 1984, I had never been in a wrestling ring and had no professional training and no amateur background. So the next night in the Dorton Arena in Raleigh, when I did step officially into the ring, that was my first entry. And that's part of the story, right? No training, no background. I debut on television in front of a sold-out crowd. That was a little dicey.
I can imagine the nerves were through the roof on that night.
Well, and I guess Crockett said he really did want us to get there early. We got there late, not my fault. I'm just along for the ride, so I'm not driving. And so we didn't really have time to get in the ring, which he wanted. And so I think he started having second thoughts. And Ivan came to me and goes, "Okay, whatever you do, don't trip on the ropes, get into the ring." And I thought, well, how hard can that be? I mean, well, you've never tried to climb in a wrestling ring. It's harder than you might imagine. And so that's all I was thinking about going to the ring. Don't trip on the ropes, because apparently if I did, I was going to be history. I was going to be out of there. So that was my focus on that night. Don't trip on the ropes.
All
right, Marty, you're up.
All right. Well, again, kind of early in the career, Tom had mentioned, Ivan Koloff, Don Kernodle. I know you traveled the roads with them. I've read that you guys would travel as much as 2,000 to 2,500 miles a week. When you had your incredible face turn with Dusty Rhodes and the Superpowers, I believe you guys traveled up and down the roads as well. my question, do you have any good road stories with any of those groups of guys that you spent so much, I'm sure, quality time with?
Well, yeah, we did. We did certainly in those early days spend a lot of time in the car. You know, before we went on the Superstation on TBS, we basically drove everywhere. Well, we did. We didn't fly anywhere. It wasn't until going on the Superstation and then Crockett deciding to expand, you know, into Pittsburgh or Philadelphia, the Meadowlands, or, you know, wherever else, Chicago, wherever else we went, that we started flying. And so, I look back, I guess, with Ivan and Don, it was, and I do give them, as you made mention, so much credit to the early success that I had, because even though we didn't get to the town early that first night of my debut, for the next 2 or 3 months, we would get to the town early, 2 or 3 hours early. And they would bump and thump all over the ring, teaching me the mechanics, old school mechanics of wrestling. And then I'd have a very short single match. Uncle Ivan Koloff. He would sit in my corner. They were the world tag champs. I'd sit in their corner, watch their match. And then on the drive home every night, we talk about the old school psychology of wrestling. And so many of those road trips were kind of filled with that, just filling me in on and learning the ropes of wrestling, if you will, you know, the art of wrestling. And with Ivan and Don, that was many, many nights. One of the best stories, a quick story, would be since just recently we celebrated a 4th of July celebration, right? The birth of this great nation. We were driving back from somewhere. I don't remember where. It was early. It was that first year, that rookie year. And I'm in the back seat. Don Cornotto's driving. Uncle Ivan's in the passenger. You know, he's riding shotgun. And we get pulled over by one of South Carolina's finest. And Cornotto's all nervous. He's like, Nikita, man, don't turn around. Don't look back. Don't say a word. You know, I don't know what he thought I was going to do, get out and beat up the trooper or what, but he's like, just, I'm like, yeah, fine. So he gets out. In those days, you get out of the car, right? He gets out, he goes to the back of the car. So I can hear the conversation. And he's like talking to the trooper. And then I hear this. I hear, officer, surely on the celebration of the birth of this great nation, you're not going to get the pride of the USA a speeding ticket, And I go, are you kidding me? And he's on one knee, like with his hands up in the air, you know, looking up at the officer. And I had to turn around. And then the rest of the shorter version of the rest of that story, he doesn't give a speeding ticket, but he ends up saying, hey, who else you got in the car with you there? And in the meantime, 3 or 4 other trooper cars pull up, and it becomes a fan fest way before they were ever popular. And they're looking at the world tag belts, and we're signing stuff, and no speeding ticket for Cornotto. So that's one memorable story about one of our road trips from the pride of the USA, Don Cornotto. Dusty and I, man, we just had wonderful conversations, just building a friendship and building a lasting, loving relationship with each other that I cherish those moments to this day, riding in that convertible 2-seater red Mercedes of his. So I'll just got to stop there, because I know you got a lot of questions you want to ask.
All right. Well, I've got an angry dog upstairs I might have to go up and tend to. But Mike, you're up next.
All right. Yep. Well, since we've already established that everything on the internet is usually correct, of course, you've had so many legendary matches, you know, the best of 7 with Magnum. You've won TV titles, tag titles. I did read online that you consider the Great American Bash 85 match with Ric Flair to be your favorite. Is that accurate?
It's it is somewhat accurate. It is one of my favorites. It's hard to honestly, it's hard to pin down or narrow down to any one match, right? But that said, certainly, again, if you consider only 13 months prior to that match, I debuted in Raleigh, North Carolina. Only 13 months prior. So I still barely know anything about professional wrestling, and yet I'm the world tag team champion. I'm the world six-man champion, and now I'm wrestling the icon who became the icon, Ric Flair, the Nature Boy, for the world heavyweight. I mean, he flies in on a helicopter, Channel 9 News helicopter, and, gets out in that robe. And, I don't know how 25, 30, 35,000, however many people are there. So that was certainly one of the memorable matches. The best of 7 you made reference to. That series of matches is one of the favorites. And then if I had a top 3, let's just say, the very first ever War Games, Atlanta Omni against the Horsemen.
Okay.
Yeah, we remember that well. I remember I could picture that commercial in my head right now. We were so excited for that back in the day. Mike asked you earlier about anyone trying to take liberties with you. This question it ties in somewhat with that. I think you have mentioned that, and I think there's maybe a difference between wrestling snug and stiff, that you were snug. So my question is, was there anybody or multiple gentlemen that you faced that were on the stiff side that you had to kind of back them off a little bit?
You guys have done your homework. I love it. I love it. Because guys will throw that out. I go, like when you talk about Magnum, our matches, my matches against Magnum, guys go, man, you guys were pretty stiff. And I go, well, I prefer to think that Magnum and I were snug, not stiff. But that said, that was my style of wrestling. Yeah, and a couple guys that come to mind, that one that had a reputation of being reckless, and the other who was, my understanding, when he took his glasses off, couldn't see his hand in front of his face. That'd be a guy by the name of Stan the Lariat Hansen. Wow. And when he was swinging that cowbell, you better make sure you're paying attention, or you get knocked out, and all he'd have to do is cover you for a 1, 2, 3. So Stan was pretty rough. But that was his style, right? That was Stan's style. How he could, see his opponent being, from what I understand, blind as a bat. I guess he just saw a blur. I don't know. But so Stan, and then the reckless reputation was Van Vader, big Van Vader, Leon White. And in fact, my very last match, November 7th, 1992, was with Leon, Winston-Salem, North Carolina, right just a few days after Halloween Havoc. And he injured my neck. And then I didn't know to the next day. I went to the doctor to get that checked. And I go, man, I hurt down low here. He goes, oh, you got a hernia. Because, he was a legit 450, 500 pounds, right? So I got a hernia, big, picking the big guy up. Now, to his credit, I was doing an autograph signing in Miami during a WrestleMania, and he sought me out and came to me and said, I've never said this, but I just wanted to apologize, ask for your forgiveness for injuring you that night. He didn't have to do that. I thought it was admirable of him to humble himself and do that. But those were 2 names that come to mind.
Okay. And it's interesting that you mentioned Stan Hansen. We might come back to him later. I won't spoil that, but I'll pass it on to Mike.
Actually, I think it's Marty.
Oh, is it Marty? I'm sorry.
Yep. Well, I would love to jump into 1986, the Great American Bash series. The Russians, you guys had the unbelievable double chain match with the Road Warriors. Extremely physical match. I've heard you talk about the chain match before. I mean, that's a real chain. It wasn't gimmicked. There's really no way that you can prepare to have a wrestling match with a chain. Did anyone have any type of injuries in those kind of matches?
You are 100% correct on in that that one, it was a real chain. 2, hard to control a real chain. And so, yes, I mean, no matter how careful you maybe tried to be, something was potentially going to happen. Like, for one thing, we used to wrap it around a guy's mouth or whatever, right? Well, it's metal and our teeth are enamel. And so once I retired from wrestling, I had cosmetic surgery only to fix all the different chips in my teeth from the chains. You try to ball it up in your fist and control as much as when you're punching. But again, those little loose links fly around. And so it wasn't uncommon to, perhaps a guy to get what in those days was called a hard way and get cut open from the chain potentially. And then one of the most memorable things, not so much for the stinger, but for me, I had a chain match in Chicago, and one of my favorite things to do is wrap a chain around a guy's neck and run him to the ropes and throw him over the top rope and hang him. Well, unbeknownst to me, he's dangling and kind of kicking his feet and I'm like, wow, he's like really selling this thing. I mean, the fans I'm looking at the fans, like they're really good. Well, little I know till later, he was about 3 seconds from passing out because the chain, the more he struggled, the more it cinched up around his neck. Now, the key was to get your fingers between the chain and your neck, but it was so tight he couldn't do that. And so he about passed out, and I guess I released it just at the right time so that he didn't pass out. But those are just a couple examples of how really dangerous the chain match could be, but also how careful you tried to be.
And I'd be remiss if I didn't just tell you one of the lasting images in my mind is in that double chain match when unfortunately you received a groin shot with the chain.
Was that the one? And did I do a flip?
Yes.
Yeah, see, that was kind of a favorite move that Ivan taught me, is hey, have, especially as a bad guy, have him do this. And when he yanks it, just do a flip, and man, you can sell that all day long, right? So yeah, absolutely. Those dirty road warriors, stop, I'm telling you.
Yeah.
Mike.
Yep.
You?
Yep. Well, we've already established you've won, multiple titles, pretty much every major title except for the world title. Would you be able to pick one title victory that kind of stands out above all the rest? Because I think most people would probably think like the U.S. title and the best of 7, but at the same time, you won, I believe it was the 6-man tag titles first. So you either got your first title win or your first singles title win. So I was curious if there was one that you could kind of pick out above the rest, or are they more like your children, or you love them all and you can't really pick one out from the rest?
I like that. I like your children. You love them all the same.
Yeah,
I like that.
yeah.
Or at least you better love them all. No favorites here. No favorites.
Yep. Not at all.
Although my youngest daughter, Colby, she will swear that I love her more than her sisters. But Colby, it's not true for the record. I love all you girls the same. I'm just saying. I'm on record. Love all you girls the same. Colby, Kendra, Tawny, and Taryn. Gosh, that's really a great question. I've never thought, really kind of thought, I don't know, I've ever been asked that before. Like, that's what I'm saying. It's really gets me thinking here. I mean, when I look back, some of the victories I've had, whether, the unification match of the World TV title against Terry Taylor, Starrcade 87, right? I don't know, it might have been televised, but when I unified the belts and beat Wahoo McDaniel, he had the national heavyweight belt, I had the U.S. belt, and we're unifying those two. And he was gracious enough to drop that strap to me. So whether it was that, certainly certainly the number 7 of the best of 7 was certainly memorable, to say the least. It set the tone for I think helped set the tone for my career. So I don't know that I can say that any one was more that could favor one more than the other. You did mention the one I didn't win was the world heavyweight title, and I will say, people ask me, do I have any regrets that I didn't win that? It was offered to me twice by Rick, and I'm probably one of the very few guys, perhaps, that respectfully just declined and said, thank you, but no thank you. So yeah, there you go.
All right. I have a question here to get your thoughts on another wrestler. This is a gentleman that when he hit WTBS as kids, we were just kind of awestruck. I hear very little about this guy. If I'm not mistaken, he was brought in as the Russian assassin to take care of you by your uncle, and that was Al Blake, Vladimir Petrov.
Vladimir Petrov.
Any just thoughts you can give us on Vladimir, or any stories? Because I just, as I said, I can't really find anything on him.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know a whole lot about Al. Post wrestling, I don't. If I just refer to his wrestling career, I don't really know a whole lot about his, even his, what level of training he had, or I know his personality didn't gel well with a lot of guys. He was one guy that you just didn't rib. He had a personality that, that expression of looks could kill. Vladimir / Al had that type of personality. So, his career was short-lived. I think partly in part to that he just never really excelled to the level that they were hoping he would. And so he just kind of like I'm sure many others before us, just kind of drifted off into the sunset to never be heard of again. So.
Okay. All right, Marty.
All right. Well, I was going to move forward just a little bit here, and you actually mentioned him, Terry Taylor. In my opinion, I feel that your feud with Terry Taylor is very underrated. To me, there was something fresh, having the contrast of having the heel being the smaller, scientific wrestler, so to speak, and having the babyface being the big monster. It was such a neat contrast, but then you throw in Hot Stuff Eddie Gilbert to help, even the side. Just wanted to ask you, how did you like working with Terry Taylor? What did you think of your match at Starrcade? And in a shoot, Terry Taylor once said that, I believe he said Dusty Rhodes asked you to take his head off. And I'm sure that is just some type of a rumor or hearsay from him. And he said he stiffed you in the match to get your reaction. I just wanted to get your thoughts.
So great memories with Terry. I would say this. One, I appreciate you saying the matches against him were underrated. I would go a step further and say Terry Taylor was very underrated as a grappler in the ring. And I don't think he got, enough as much respect that you really deserved. He had a great head for the business, great ring tactician, as you're saying. And perhaps maybe the Red Rooster gimmick kind of tarnished, kind of his ring prowess. I don't know, but I will say that for the record, I'm unaware of for the record, Dusty did not tell me to take his head off. I don't ever remember that conversation in the little red Corvette or the little red Mercedes, I should say. And I just enjoyed the matches I had with Terry, and especially Starrcade. I've had a lot of others compliment that match, that they thought that was a really great match. I love your perspective on scientific versus, the muscle, brain against brawn kind of thing. And Eddie Gilbert did bring another dynamic to it. And so, yeah, Terry was very underrated, and glad I had the opportunity to have some matches against him, and know he's even done well, post his wrestling career, and kudos to Terry.
Yeah, and just one quick side note on that. the way you guys really kickstarted the feud in the TBS studios when they jumped you from behind, they stole your TV title from the podium. You came out of the ring and you're yelling at Tony Schiavone saying, "Who took my title?" Your promo was tremendous. It just, the passion and the anger, so believable. It just set the feud up so perfectly.
You know what? Let me tag onto that. So for your audience, for those who may not know, so here's one difference. I from my understanding from today's product versus then. So you mentioned the passion with the interview. Well, what people have to understand is, at least I'm just going to speak for myself, but I think I can speak for the industry as a whole back then. What people have to understand is all of those interviews were 100% spontaneous. In other words, there was no writer handing me a script saying, memorize this and go out and say this. So it was 100% spontaneous. And if you want to kind of say from the heart, so to speak, which is why I believe back then it was so much more believable. Now, obviously, it's been advertised now as sports entertainment, but that fed into the believability, including the matches themselves, where we would step into the ring many times, never even having seen our opponent prior to the match, because we'd be in opposite ends of the building, and we go out and tell an improv. I like to say the best in improv. We go out and tell an improv story in the ring spontaneously, and that led. So when you watch old matches in the 80s, even fan reaction, I believe, is which is why it was more organic. The fan reaction was more organic too. So I appreciate that. Mentioning about that interview.
Absolutely.
Okay. I'm actually going to jump ahead a little bit more here. Specifically 1991, when you made your return, you hit Lex with the new United States Championship, and then they had those memorable vignettes of you working out in that little room with the smoke. And then, if I recall, there was a picture of Lex in there, so it seemed like they were headed in that direction. But then at Super Brawl, it ended up shifting to you and Sting, which led to the chain match at the Great American Bash that year. So actually, it's kind of a two-part question. Was the plan always for you and Sting, or was it originally going to be you and Luger, and then at some point it shifted? And then on top of that, if you wouldn't mind just going back to those vignettes in that room, the little smoke-filled room, it was just you working out. If I recall, there was no dialogue. It was just you lifting weights in the room. I was just curious just to hear a little bit more about those vignettes, maybe how they were filmed, where they were filmed.
Okay. So just a point of clarity to separate the two-part question, a two-part answer. So those were the dungeon scenes, right? The dungeon scene.
Exactly.
And those were actually, believe it or not, filmed in a corner of Crockett's office where we did all of our interviews. A little studio. It wasn't even really a studio; it was a garage that we turned into a studio. But we turned a corner of the garage into the dungeon, and so the one single light hanging down, the old looking equipment, the black walls, the Russian flag. So all of that first was a build up. And it was Ric Flair's picture on the heavy bag that I was sickling, right? So that was a build up for the 1985 Great American Bash, okay? And people still talk about those dungeon scenes all the time and the intensity of them. And you are correct. There was very little dialogue. It was just clips of me focused on taking the gold to Moscow, right? And so that was the dungeon scene. Fast forward 1991, they wanted me to come back because I took some time off. I had my wife Mandy had passed away with cancer. For those who aren't aware, that's why I took a hiatus, a sabbatical, if you will, to take care of her. And she had passed. It was actually not long after that her passing that Rick had offered me the world heavyweight belts 2 different times. And so when I eventually agreed to come back, they said, we want you to be a heel. I want you to be a bad guy. I go, guys, it's not going to get over. The thing with Magnum TA, I feel, with the I Cry a Tear and the one interview Dusty and I did is the Thupa Powers, baby, if you will, Nikita Koloff and I yell. We don't see eye to eye, baby, big deal. We the Thupa Powers, if you will. Right? That interview, the magazine cover with my headshot with a tear coming down, got over. We felt so strong, but they were convinced I could be a heel. They go, oh, no, we'll put you against Luger. He's like one of our hottest baby faces. I'm like, all right, because I've always been a business guy. I'm like, all right, if you think it'll do business, let's do it. So we did it. And I would say every auditorium we went to was about 50-50. About 50% cheered Lex, about 50% cheered me. And they're like, all right, maybe you're right. Well, we'll put you against Sting because he's the hottest baby face. So that's why we set it up in St. Pete, I think the Clash of Champions, where it looked like I was going after Luger to continue our feud. Sting, I think, shoves him out of the way. He gets nailed, and that would set up the angle to work against Sting. And that was about 75-25. About 75% of the people cheered him, about 25% cheered me. And I wanted to end my career on a good note. So I took another hiatus, came back, did an appeal to Sting with a little stinger in the ring, who, by the way, was Karen, my oldest daughter.
Oh.
And ended my career as a good guy, as a babyface.
All right. I am going to jump out of the ring here. This is interesting to me. I don't know if I've really heard of any pro wrestlers that were really took their craft any more serious than you. And translating that outside the ring, in terms of smartening folks up, as they say, relationships that you had outside of the ring, how long did it take you to smarten folks up, or did you at all that you weren't actually Russian, or did you keep it going?
So believe it or not, it was a 3-year transition. Once I made the decision to walk away from wrestling under my own terms, wasn't forced out, wasn't injury related. I made a decision on my own terms that I was done. Part of that was a goal. I mean, when I broke into wrestling, I told Ivan and Don I'd be out of active in-ring wrestling by the time I was 35. I mentioned that Vader hurt me in my final match. That wasn't career ending, but it was during the rehabilitation of the neck. And I ended up having surgery, a hernia surgery. And I made an executive decision to walk away by 35 anyway. And so I made that decision. 3 years, I continued to maintain that persona. I'm talking the accent. Anywhere outside of the home I lived in, the car I drove in. I mean, I maintained it because in my mind, I'm like, how do I just go from the Russian Nightmare, And I owned a gym at the time. I was training people every day, writing up diets and exercise for them. Do I just walk in one day and go, hey, how's everybody doing today? I'm like, no, in my mind, it just seemed weird. Of course, some would probably say it was just weird. I was just weird anyway, but to maintain. But I wanted to, 1, protect the business, 2, protect my character, and number 3, I just slowly phased the accent out. Nobody ever really questioned it. I think more and more people just got smartened up on their own, or maybe even already knew. But I just phased it out, and nobody ever said anything. Nobody. Now I have all kinds of people now go, man, I wish he still took. I just can't get used to him talking English,
All right, Marty.
All right. Well, we are from Cincinnati, so I kind of wanted to ask you.
The Cincinnati Gardens.
Yes, sir. Exactly.
We were there many times.
We sure were. I know in '86 at the Bash, they had match number 2. You guys had the best of 7. That was at Riverfront. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to make that, but we went to the Cincinnati Gardens many times over the years. Matter of fact, in 1988, for my birthday present, I wanted wrestling tickets. I got to see, I was blown away. The War Games actually was in Cincinnati Gardens in '88. But my question is, do you have any memories wrestling in the Cincinnati Gardens, whether it be a specific match, a fan incident, or in the locker rooms, any type of memories?
Well, I have one. That was. I remember that. I remember the Cincinnati Gardens well, and just how many matches we had in there. I don't recall. I can't remember. The Riverfront Stadium, when you talk about the Bash, the second match against Magnum, right? I if I'm not mistaken, I think I got color in that match, and I guess I hit a vein or something, because I was like what you might call crimson red from head to toe, even though I was wearing my red singlet, and I remember it took me forever once I got back to the dressing room trying to get it stopped, and then I finally did, and then I bent over to pick something up, and man, here came gushing again. I'm like, oh my gosh, and I'm just not a doctor, guy, so I wasn't about to go get stitches or anything. I'm like, well, I'll patch it up and I'll be fine, But that's one memory. I'm 99.9% sure that was Cincinnati.
All right,
Mike.
Yep. Well, of course, made reference to how your last match was shortly after Halloween Havoc in 1992, and you were only, I believe, was it 33, 34 at the time. Was there ever a period where you either were, I guess, got the itch to get back into the business? Did anybody ever try to lure you back in at any point?
When TNA started in 2002, I think, with Jeff Jarrett.
Yep.
I made four appearances for them to try to help them get off the ground. Jeff wanted me to put the tights back on. I'm like, Jeff, I'm just not interested. He's like, no, we'll put you in a 6-man. You can stand in the corner. You don't even have to get in the ring. I'm like, I look like an idiot if I didn't get in the ring. I mean, come on, Jeff. I'm like, really? For real? And no, I was, again, in my mind, and I think I'm one of the few, maybe you guys might know, you guys do all your research, but I'm probably one of the few that actually retired and stayed retired. I mean, kind of coined the Barry Sanders of pro wrestling for all the football fans out there. That'll probably make sense to them. But that was part of my goal, to leave on top of the business. And so fortunately, I don't necessarily never really had an itch to get back in the ring, but I'm still connected. I've always stayed connected with the wrestling fans, whether it's through social media, right? Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, my own podcast, the Man Up podcast, or autograph signings, virtual signings, Legends events, Comic-Cons, WrestleCons. So I'm on sometimes some smaller shows around the Mid-Atlantic area to help boost their crowd. So I still get to be a part of it without getting in there and potentially breaking my body down further than it is now.
All right. I think I am going to go ask a question about Japan. I'm not quite sure how many matches or how many tours, I guess you would say, you had in Japan. But I've seen some of the old video, and I know certainly the crowds were much different. And I could be wrong. I think you were allowed to get physical with the crowd. Maybe you can touch on that. But what were the differences, not only just wrestling in Japan versus the US, but just like everyday life, getting to and from there, et cetera?
Yeah, it was a great memory. In fact, when people ask me, so I've been to 30 different countries so far, and Japan ranks right up there at the top as some of the most honoring, respectful people I've ever met, like for real, and in that being in their culture, and I get, not just because I was a wrestler, although they viewed professional wrestling in those days, I don't know about now, as they did, with the respect that American baseball, America's pastime has in America. I mean, so they were incredibly respectful, both behind the scenes, other wrestlers, and they would test you though. I mean, they had a different style of wrestling. You want to talk about snug or stiff? Then let's talk about Japan. They worked a very stiff / snug style of wrestling. Well, I was okay with that because that's what I did anyway, right? And so, but they would test you. They would test to see how far they could go with you. Some of the guys in the ring, some of them were real shooters, what we call shooters. I mean, really knew their amateur wrestling well. And so you had to be on guard for that and kind of set the tone right from the start. Great memories. I had 3 tours over there and just great memories in the ring. And for sure, the fans, the very first couple times, it was weird because in the sense that you did something and, you did what we call a high spot in America and you get a pop from the crowd, right? Well, they do back then, they did nothing. You look at them, they just staring at you.
Yeah.
And you're like, man, this is just not getting over. Well, it was, but their idea, it was when you did something really spectacular was to clap. It didn't matter who you were. Bad guy, good guy, didn't matter. It's like, hey. I'm like, all right, that's just weird. But so you had to kind of get used to the fan reactions and just have your match and just know that at some point, they were gonna give you the hand clap just because they appreciated a really good match. And so, and it was beautiful. And I love touring the country, and I wasn't fond of the food, for the record. I'm not a fish and seafood guy, and it seemed like that's about the only thing they wanted to feed you over there. So I might have went over at 285. I think it came back from 240. I'm kidding, but I brought a lot of protein bars with me. Let's just say that.
All right, Marty, you're up. I have a feeling I know where you're going to go with this. Let me see if I'm right.
Well, this I have to ask. I know we're kind of getting close on time here, but I'd be remiss if I didn't ask this. Just right out of the gate, my brothers and I are absolutely big fans of Jim Crockett, NWA, the more traditional wrestling based. Even when we were younger, we were not really fans of WWF. I stayed in touch and watched some of it because I was a huge professional wrestling fan. My question for you, at that time before the quote unquote Monday Night Wars happened, even back in the 80s, was there that rivalry between the companies? It's well known Vince McMahon would use his power to block Jim Crockett from certain pay-per-view markets and really do some what I would call underhanded tricks. So did you guys have that actual rivalry at that time with WWF, or was it just a business rivalry or professional all the way?
No, there was for sure a rivalry. And in fact, my first time ever meeting Vince McMahon was in Las Vegas at a gym. We were running in one building. I think he was running, I think it was maybe the Thomas Mack Center or something. I don't know what it was called. But anyway, he was running one building. We were running another building. And he intentionally did that pretty much almost anywhere up north or even out west that we went. I mean, Philadelphia, Baltimore. I mean, we'd be at the Philadelphia Civic Center. He'd be at the Philadelphia Spectrum. And so fairly often, especially on the weekends in the bigger buildings, the bigger markets, we were going head to head. And it was, it was known that there was a level of competition going on there. And the way I understood it, especially when Crockett when eventually got into Ted Turner's hands, apparently he didn't like Turner didn't like him or whatever. I don't know the truth of that, but that's what we were told anyway. And so it was just interesting to, if you remember, well, some might remember at the end of each of our shows for a while, there was kind of a tagline that said, "We're the NWA, we wrestle."
Yep.
You remember that, Marty?
Yep, absolutely.
The NWA, we wrestle. That's kind of like how we closed our show. Well, that was a knock on what the NWA felt was the cartoon WWF, right? You got your cartoons, but we actually wrestle, right? So that was the whole reason behind the whole we wrestle. It was really a knock on the WWF at the time. And so without a doubt, yeah, there was well-known competition going on. And you're right, he did and had a lock on a lot of the bigger buildings. He had a lock on as well. So we were not able to get in certain buildings as well.
Yeah.
All right, Mike, if you want to jump in, and I think we'll do maybe one more question each. And then we do a little something here on this podcast. Normally we break things down, hence our name, the Tournament Podcast. And we take criteria. Actually, we've done many on pro wrestling. We had one, the greatest pro wrestlers to never win a world title. You were in there. And we kind of randomly generate this tournament and we talk through it, and that's our podcast. We have another way of doing it, which we call a reverse tournament, where we start with 0 and it's more or less building a Mount Rushmore. I'm going to have a question for you on that. That's where earlier I brought up Stan the Lariat Hansen. We'll see if he's in there. But if Mike, you want to ask one, I have one to play off the one that I previously asked. Then Marty, and well, we'll see if we have time for Marty.
I like as much time as you guys need. I like the name Tournament Podcast. Although I think you should rename it the Tom, Mike, and Marty Party. I'm thinking,
Well, we were tossing around names, so
yeah.
You can do the Tournament Podcast / Tom, Mike, Marty Party. There you go. Anyway,
sounds good. I don't know how much you keep up with the current product as far as like WWE, AEW, or even Impact. But if you do, I was wondering if there was anybody that kind of jumps out at you that you could take that person, drop them into JCP, and you think you could have had a great match with them.
Wow. There's a lot of guys. I say a lot. I mean, there's a handful of guys I would have really, looking back, and enjoyed an opportunity to step in the ring with them. I mean, the magazines touted back in the day, the what if. So this is all what if, right? What if Nikita Koloff had wrestled Hulk Hogan at WrestleMania? What if? I mean, I'm certain it would have probably been big money for McMahon. I'd like to think it would have been anyway. Could be wrong, but there's that question. The Rock, HBK, Triple H. I mean, there's some guys that would have been fun to get in the ring with. The Macho Man. There's just some guys that would have been fun to get in the ring with. Currently, it would have been fun to wrestle Rick Aldis, or excuse me, Mick Aldis. I'm thinking Rick. I said Rick because I'm thinking he's like a modern day Ric Flair in my view. I mean, how he carries himself. And I'm talking about the NWA current champion, Nick Aldis, or I guess how you say his name. But he carries himself. He just so reminds me of the Nature Boy, and having the 10 pounds of gold and how well spoken he is, and I think it'd be fun to get in the. It would have been fun to get in the ring with him and have some matches against Nick, for sure. So there you go.
Yeah, I think we all would have liked to have seen that.
Heck yeah. All right. I asked before about the Japanese crowd and their different way of enjoying the show, if you will. So I wanted to go back to the face turn with Dusty. I'm sure you've had questions probably every podcast you do about that. I will admit, next month I turn 50 years old. I will watch that clip today and I get goosebumps when you enter the ring. That crowd literally explodes. I don't know if I've heard one, at least through TV, any louder. My question to you is, was that the loudest pop? I mean, normally when you were a heel, you didn't get much of a pop, but was that the loudest pop you ever received or were ever a part of, ever heard?
Man, I'm reminded of a recent story that somebody asked Tony Schiavone this question. What show were you a part of that you remember that question, the loudest pop ever happening? To my understanding, Tony Schiavone's response was the night Nikita turned babyface in the Charlotte Coliseum, which I receive as if it's true, he said that, I receive it as a tremendous compliment. There's no question the old expression, the roof came off the building. I mean, when the way we set it up and the way I pantomimed that whole turn in, pausing in the door of the cage, if you I'm sure remember, and even trailing him to the ring, pausing for just a second before I even got in the door. And then when I lit into Ole Anderson, and yeah, the place exploded. And then with the help of Dusty, once the 1, 2, 3 was over, that crowd, and I don't think I'm exaggerating this, and again, going back to the organic reaction of the crowd because of just what they experienced in the moment, they chanted my name for 10 plus minutes. I mean, you want to talk about, I guess the right word there might be surreal. I mean, just a month prior, I mean, they were throwing stuff at me. They were telling me, I was number one in their heart, if you know what I mean. And I mean, I was loved to be hated. They loved to hate me. And man, on a dime, we flipped them on a dime. I mean, there were guys in the audience, they had their shirts off. And they were doing the most muscular, like I would do in the end of interviews and stuff. I mean, it was surreal to be there and listen to them chant Nikita, Nikita, all that time. And of course, Flair coming down, and we did something there too, just for your audience to understand, that I doubt would ever be done again, or could ever be done again, because the internet and everything else, is I could count the number of guys that knew I was turning that night. You could count on one hand without one or two fingers. We told nobody. I didn't tell Ivan. I was instructed not to say a word to anyone. We told no one. And I'm talking about every guy in the business. And so it was a complete surprise, not just for you as a fan, for all the guys in the dressing rooms as well. It was a complete surprise. So that would rank up there. Yeah, by far, numero uno.
Okay. As I want to be respectful of time, Marty, if you have one more.
Sure. I
got to let you get one more in. It'll break your heart if you don't.
We'll just have to do it again. Hey, we'll just have to have this party again sometime. So.
Would love that. Well, I'll try to be very quick with this one, brief, without getting into any specifics. I just wanted to ask a little bit about your payoffs. I know back in the day, you were paid on how many, quote unquote, butts were in the seats. So correct. As far as like kayfabe goes, were you paid any more as a title holder? I know you would be higher up on the card as, say, when you have the TV title or US title. Were you paid more when you had the title based on your ranking on the card?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, typically the idea, and I don't know how promoted they had some sort of formulas that they figured out over 100 years or whatever. That obviously an opening match wasn't typically going to make as much as a main event match, right? And so the only one that I know of in those days that had, if you want to say a guarantee, was whoever had the 10 pounds of gold. So whether it's Ric Flair or anyone else, you were guaranteed 10% of the gate. 10%. So obviously you can make some pretty good paydays. as a world champion if you were a draw as the world champion. Outside of that, the way I understand it, it was broken down by a promoter's formula, and I have no idea what kind of formula. I actually questioned the sanity of their formula at times, believe it or not. And when I first broke in, I want your audience to understand this. In those days, you are correct. You got paid on the number of people that were in the building, and then you hope that the promoter was being honest in his accounting. There wasn't computers back in those days. It was all cash cow. I mean, it was cash money being hand counted. And so, you started getting good at counting heads, estimating heads and ticket prices and kind of getting a handle on what you thought the gate might be. All that said, we had a $50 guarantee that if there were only 10 people in the building, you still knew you were going to get paid $50. You knew you were going to get paid at least $50. And that was anybody on the card. And out of that came your gas money, your food expenses. They paid for nothing. You paid for everything basically. And then television tapings were even less. It was $40. I never understood that formula for whatever reason. But it was, so there were times, and I worked 7 nights a week in those early days. So there were times that I had a $340 paycheck, 6 nights at $50 and 1 night at $40 for our television taping, because we taped every week. There were plenty of those checks in those early days.
Wow.
Okay.
Yeah. Before I move on and ask you to engage in this tournament, so to speak, I do appreciate the fact, and really to each their own, but you've kind of, in superhero terms, have used your powers for good, as I would say. And looking at your shirt and what you are doing now with your life, can you just kind of give people that don't know a rundown of everything that you are currently doing?
Yeah, I appreciate it, guys. Yeah, I'll try to be brief. I want to respect your guys' time as well. But yes, I mean, the shirt you're seeing, the shirt says man camp, right? It's I'll just start with that. Since I'm wearing the shirt, that's a camp that Lex Luger and I, the total package, Lex Luger, that we co-facilitate together. It's a camp for men. We do it in Royston, Georgia. We do it in spring and the fall. Where people, everything I'm going to share with you right now, if people want more information, it's a one-stop shop. They can just go to koloff.net, and they can link to the Man Camp information. They can link to my Man Up podcast right there on the koloff.net. They can link to all my social media. They can go on the store. You mentioned at the opening, I've authored several books. If you had told me in high school I'd be writing books, I would have said you were smoking crack. I'm serious. English was not my strong suit, but right. 3 books, and I'm working on a 4th. In fact, my latest one, Nikita, A Tale of the Ring and Redemption, I just updated. Last year I wrote 7 or 8 new chapters, and we added new pictures to it. So, I'm in the process of writing a 4th book. So I'm doing that. These camps, Lex and I do, like I said, one in the spring, one in the fall. I'll do about 15 plus conferences this year, men's conferences in local communities and churches called Man Up. Getting a theme here. Man Up Show, Man Up Podcast, Man Up Conference, Man Camp. And I do travel and also evangelize as a minister. So I'll do these conferences a lot of times on Saturday, stay over and preach in the local church on Sunday. So between writing books, having a weekly radio show, podcast, speaking, traveling, still mixing up with the wrestling world. Thank you, wrestling world, for all the love that you show me every time I'm out. I work with a couple guys that I've christened the name Koloff Dynasty, Neil Koloff, Alexander Koloff, and just extending the Koloff legacy. I don't do a lot with that, but I kind of, if you want to say, manage them, coach them. And so that gives me still a little fun without putting the tights on and getting in the ring. So I'll do a little bit of that. And yeah, that's I'm grateful. I'm grateful to be on Truth Radio Network with Stu Epperson and be able to share some of my story and what I'm doing all around the world, guys. And just grateful to be here with you guys tonight.
Well, thank you so much. And we are going to close this out, as I mentioned, with the tournament, which the way we do it is just a fancy way. It's a Mount Rushmore. So what we want to ask you, taking the Russian sickle out of the equation, we're going to say that's the greatest of all time. What would be the 4 best clotheslines / lariats that you have ever seen? That's why I brought up Hansen earlier. I don't know if he'll make the list, but.
By the way, there's lots of clotheslines, but there's only one Russian sickle.
Absolutely.
Yep, that's correct.
Just saying. I'm just saying. So I got to give you 4. Let's see. Hansen is on the list for sure. And Hansen's on the list. Gosh, let me think. You're having me rack my memory here. I'm trying to remember his initial JBL.
Yep, Bradshaw.
Yep,
Bradshaw. Thank you.
Yep.
What was his initials though? John JLB or JBL or
John Bradshaw Layfield.
Yep.
Yeah. So John would be on the list. Potentially Hawk and Animal could be on the list as well. Either or both.
Yeah.
Could be on the list. Animal with that 23-inch arm, and Hawk with the clothesline off the top rope. So I'm going to say the Road Warriors, Stan Hansen and Davey there.
All right.
Bradshaw.
Well done.
Yeah.
So as we close out, I want to throw this at you. I hope I'm not putting you on the spot. I believe
you are, but it's okay. This is fun.
If I'm not mistaken, you are a Minnesota Vikings fan.
A diehard. I am a diehard. Come on, Adrian Peterson, go back to Minnesota. Well, and fortunately, I tell you a real quick cool story. And so actually, just recently, just recently, I interviewed a guy named Brad Johnson. Brad Johnson won the Super Bowl with the Tampa Bay Bucks. He was the quarterback for John Gruden, but he was drafted by the Minnesota Vikings. Brad is a great friend of mine. We joke about it all the time. You know, the fact he looked better in a Viking uniform. Why didn't he win a Super Bowl with the Vikings? But I did business with Fran Tarkington. I played golf with Chuck Foreman. So yeah, I've been around a few of the guys. Randy Moss. One more quick story.
Oh, yeah.
I get off a plane in Dallas. I'm catching a connection flight in Dallas, and I got my hood on. I mean, this was 3, 4, 5 years ago. I got my hood on, and I walk off the plane. I hear this Nikita Koloff, and I'm like, who knows me in Dallas? I mean, with my hood. And I look over, and lo and behold, it's Randy Moss. Now, I've always been a Randy Moss fan. And he goes, I knew one day I would run into you somewhere. He goes, I got to get a selfie. And he sticks out that long arm of his, and he takes a picture. And I'm like, bro, you better take one. I try to take one with mine. He's like, give me your phone, man. So he takes it with mine, and then he sends me the picture. And so we made a connection there with Randy, and anyway, Minnesota Mike. Keep going. All right, what's the
where I was going with that is this. Ironically, with us being in Cincinnati, and all 3 of us are Bengals fans, and we have some brighter days ahead of us. Finally, they actually meet in the opening game of the season, the Vikings and the Bengals. So my ask was this: a friendly wager, if you'll accept it. If the Vikings win, I will make a nice donation to the Koloff Ministry.
Okay.
If the Bengals win, you have to join us again on another episode of the Tournament Podcast. Would you be okay with that?
That is fair enough. In fact, a friend of mine, Tim Quinn, he's one of my web designers. Long time, still loyal Cincinnati. He lives in Vegas now, but he's still a loyal Cincinnati fan. I've been able to bust his chops for many, many years. But fair enough. The Bengals win. I'm back on the show. The Vikings win. A contribution to Koloff for Christ Ministries. Thank you, guys.
Absolutely. Well, it has been an absolute treat for us. I really appreciate your time. I'm sorry if we went a little bit over, but you were wonderful. I can't thank you enough.
No apology needed. No apology needed. Guys, you are kudos to you. You guys seem like you're having a lot of fun with these and you let me know how I can help spread the word when you load this up on for the world to see.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, and actually we had one more thing going out. It is a question, but I apologize.
It's all right.
Could you give us a tournament podcast intro in the old Nikita voice?
Yeah.
You're watching the tournament podcast. I almost forgot about that. I'm sorry.
No worries. You know, it gets, the reason I don't do it much, because people are like, come on, talk to your voice. I'm like, believe it or not, it's not as easy at my age as it once was.
And I'm not pushing you.
No, I understand when I was 40 years younger, but well, we'll do this. Let me do this. Let me kind of wet my whistle. Hey, it's the Russian nightmare, Nikita Koloff, and you are watching the Tournament Podcast, or you are listening to the Tournament Podcast. Either way, you better stay tuned to Tom and Mike and the Marty Party, or I come after you, Shatoeta.
Beautiful.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Yes,
We really appreciate
You're
it.
welcome. Thank you, guys. Hey, I hope you have a great rest of your week, and thanks for having me on.
You do the same.
Thank you.
Thank you
so
so
much.
much.
All right. God bless you guys.
Take care.
Bye-bye.